A congressman calls Washington, D.C. schools inmate factories, and some school districts across the country don't disclose student gender transitions to their parents. Joining us now to discuss these topics is Parents Defending Education's Director of Outreach, Erika Sanzi. Thanks for joining us here, Erika.
Morning.
At a congressional hearing on Wednesday, Representative Gary Palmer, a Republican from Alabama, referred to public schools in Washington, D.C. as inmate factories. Let's listen.
And you've got crappy schools. You're not only your schools are not only dropout factories, they're inmate factories. And you can look at this anywhere you want to in the country. And a lot of these adolescents who are committing these crimes are kids who, if they graduated high school at all, and this is pretty consistent around the country, and you can shake your head and disagree with it all you want to, Mr. Allen, it's just the fact. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If I could just respond, Mr. Chairman. I don't agree that the D.C. public schools are inmate factories. I will say that our urban...
I'm not saying all of them are.
Sure.
I said you have some crappy schools. So you're telling me all of them are excellent?
No, I'm not saying all of them.
Well, thank you.
Erika, pretty inflammatory assessment there. What do you make of this?
So I think this is our problem, right? I certainly wouldn't have put it the way that the congressman put it. But it is true that there is a direct link between student proficiency in math and reading and incarceration. So we do know that 85% of students that get wrapped up with the juvenile criminal justice system, they are functionally illiterate, and 70% of the incarcerated population of adults are also, they don't read above a fourth grade level. So he's making an important point, which has truth, and that is that there is a direct line between inability to read or low reading ability and illiteracy and incarceration. And many of the schools in DC and elsewhere in the country have extremely low proficiency rates, which tells us that many of these kids are headed for trouble and are much more likely to end up in prison.
Erika, we hear a lot of talk about school districts in places like Baltimore, certain areas of Illinois, Minnesota. Is that the correlation that you're alleging, or is that what data is showing you? Are these specific problem areas?
I mean, those are certainly problem areas. I mean, we know that in Baltimore, they have, I think it's 13 schools that have 0% of their students proficient in math, right? So obviously in our more urban areas, we are seeing incredibly low proficiency rates. They have, of course, collapsed even further since the pandemic, because those were also the areas most likely to have schools closed the longest. So again, like, we hear people talk a lot about the school to prison pipeline, but they're not talking about literacy when they say that. And I would argue that really right now, what we are dealing with is our students being moved through the grades without basic skills, and therefore unable to succeed in jobs, succeed in higher ed, and many of them do turn to crime. So I would never phrase it the way that congressman phrased it, because it doesn't seem like a solutions-oriented approach.
Sure. What would you say are solutions, and is something being done to counter those pretty disturbing statistics?
I mean, the statistics are not new, so I guess we could say it doesn't seem like we're doing enough. For sure, we have a problem across the country where the way that we teach reading doesn't work, and if people have heard about the reading wars, again, like, we pulled phonics and evidence-based reading instruction out of schools, and that has had a calamitous impact. So what we should be doing is not focusing so much on all of this extraneous other stuff and, bringing sort of activism and the culture wars into schools, and instead we should be focusing on the basics, which means, like, we need to be teaching kids how to read, and we're not doing that.
Okay, let's shift a little bit here. You say your group is tracking school districts whose policies either require or allow schools to keep a student's gender transition from parents. Tell us more about these policies, and why are these school districts keeping that information to themselves, not necessarily making sure that parents are aware of what's happening?
Yeah, this is a trend that was kind of flying under the radar for a while. My state passed something in 2016, and I didn't even realize it. But essentially what has happened is that it is becoming the norm for school districts to have written policies that state that parents are not to be notified of a student's gender transition at school unless the student gives permission for notifying the parents. And what that means in practice is that a child could be going by a different name, using different locker rooms, restrooms, sleeping on overnight field trips, with kids of the opposite sex, and all of that would be withheld from the parents. And these policies are usually coming from the state, where the state gives guidance and the school districts adopt that and they put that in their policies, or they're coming from their state school board associations. But it's very, very prevalent nationwide.
Yeah, a lot still to work out there. All right, Erika Sanzi, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it here on the National Desk.
Thanks for having me.